All right. Again, my name is Rashida Scar. I am the librarian here with South Novato Library, and I have worked with Lisa and SURJ Marin for the last 2 years now. We're getting pretty close to 2 years. And it has been a wonderful collaboration, and we're very excited to bring you the start of our next series, which is poverty and racial justice, and looking and exploring the ways in which poverty and racial justice are connected and the ways in which they impact our day-to-day lives. So we're going to have some very interesting things going on, and I will start to just give you a rundown of how today is going to go. We're going to do some brief introductions. I'm going to let Lisa introduce herself and to tell you a little bit more about SURJ. And then we are going to show you several short films. And then we will have a discussion with a panelist. And we will allow you to put your questions into chat at any point during the program. And at the end of the program, we leave time to answer those questions or to open those questions up for discussion. So feel free to type out those questions as they come to you, and we'll be sure to get to them at the end. A few housekeeping items. Um, our next session in the series is going to be called The Human Cost of Poverty. And we're going to be talking to some Marin residents who have been particularly impacted by the economic structure here in the United States, and especially here in Marin. You will receive a link for that when we send out the recording, the link for the recording of this video. Um, we have a book list on the Marin County Free Library website. Feel free to check that out. Lots of really great resources. I think Lisa has a SURJ event that is connected to that, and she'll explain more about that in a moment. We are still waiting for our panelists. There was some technical difficulties this morning, so when she comes on, I will introduce her formally. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa with SURJ Marin, and she will share a little bit about her organization.
Thank you. And just before we go any further, I just want to ask for your grace and compassion, everyone. Normally, there are twice as many of us pulling off this event. And due to life experiences happening, it's just me and Rashida. So if we mess up a little bit, we just request a little bit of grace from you as we get through this together. My name is Lisa Bennett. I live in Sausalito, and I want to tell you a little bit about SURJ Marin. SURJ, SURJ, stands for Showing Up for Racial Justice. It's a national network of groups and individuals who understand the strategic role that white people have in the movement for racial and economic justice. SURJ Marin is just a local chapter of a national organization. The things we do, we are focused on educating white folks about the persistent impacts of white supremacy that are often invisible to us. The SURJ Marin Book Discussion Group is actually hosting its February book discussion with a book in the recommended reading list on Sunday, February 26th from 4:30 to 6 p.m. on Zoom. The book is entitled Our Black Year, One Family's Quest to Buy Black in America's Racially Divided Economy by Maggie Anderson. And people can register at surjmarin.org/events. SURJ Marin also mobilizes white folks to show up at local governmental meetings to fight for more equitable housing, appropriate school names. We remember Dixie School, to end police violence against Black, Brown, and Indigenous people in Marin and across California, and more. We also contact state and federal elected officials about the need for equitable laws and policies directed by people impacted by those laws and policies. And we support the important and impactful work of local organizations that are led by leaders of color and serve communities of color, including the Multicultural Center of Marin, Marin County Arts and Culture, and the Marin County Cooperation Team. In order to make the change that is needed in Marin County, one of the most racially disparate counties in the state, more white folks need to understand that the Black, Brown, and Indigenous vision for change in this country is exactly what is needed for all of us to be free. The SURJ Marin website gives details and events on events and direct actions and how to become an organizer and how to donate. Thank you.
Awesome. And with that, I think, Lisa, we're going to just roll right into our land acknowledgement. This is something we do every session just to remember and remind ourselves that, as we're having these discussions about resources, land, that kind of thing, that we are, sitting on land that is stolen. And so we want to acknowledge that, but we also like to have action items for people to direct energy towards rectifying that situation. So, Lisa?
Great, thank you. And I think it's really fascinating to do this in a webinar on the theft of resources, human and otherwise, to build the capitalist system that we are now reaping the benefits from. So here's a land acknowledgement. Settle in, close your eyes if you need to. Let's take this moment to enter this webinar without the distractions of the day so that we can work together as people grounded first in the earth, first in the land. Feel yourself on the land, on the earth. Breathe deeply. Exhale. Let go. Be here. The land we are on has become a commodity. It has become something the first people could not now recognize. And by our being consciously or unconsciously on this land, which is unrecognizable to its own people, we are unrecognizable to ourselves. This unrecognizable land has owners and money and deeds and titles, all which further separate us from ourselves, from our own humanity. We bear the sins of capitalism, which is based on land ownership and money and deeds and titles. We bear the many sins committed against people who dared demand a fair share, dared demand self-determination on the land they were placed. This land was plundered, renamed, and stolen from the first people, from the people who spoke the Miwok language, from the people who had many tribes here, who suffered at the hands of the colonizers. So ground yourself in the ground, in the rich compost that makes up our human existence, and ask for the blessings of the first people so that you may walk in the road of righteousness, so that you may end the colonization of this land and of your own mind. And I ask that you may now walk the earth in reverence. Thanks.
Thank you, Lisa. That was beautiful. I will also post a link to Sogorea Te Trust. It is an indigenous-led organization by indigenous women who are looking to purchase land and use that for the growing of traditional flora and teaching, and as a headquarters for teaching the language, teaching the life ways of the coastal Miwok people and the Ohlone people. So I'll post a link for that at the end. And with that, I believe we are ready to start the films. And we'll get started. Lisa, you ready?
Okay, the first film is a short film called Why Did Europeans Enslave Africans? Is capitalism anti-Black? That's coming next. Just give me a second to cue that up. Whoops, sorry. Here we go.
I'm going to restart the recording, but I do want to just take a moment and just process that. I think a lot of times we think that these economic questions are intellectual, and that they are a thought experiment and they're, yes, an interesting topic. But I think as a society, we need to acknowledge the harm that is coming from these ongoing decisions to put money over people, to put profits over people. And that's what you were seeing there. You were seeing a trauma response. So let's just take a moment. We're going to take a deep breath in. We're going to take a deep breath out. We're going to acknowledge the history. We're going to acknowledge the wrong and the harm that was done. We're going to open ourselves up to learn, and then we're going to fix it. We're going to work together to fix this. All right. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our panelists for today, Oshalla Dee Marcus. Oshalla, do you want to come on and just tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us a little bit about your background, your area of expertise, and share just a little bit about yourself. Thank you.
Okay.
Good to
All
see
right.
you.
Thank you, Rashida. Thank you, everybody. So let's see. So we're in Marin. So I'll start by that context. So my grandparents, my father, so let's see. So my great grandfather, Toby or Tobias, because I was able to see his document, was an enslaved African in Alabama. And my father was born in Alabama and migrated up into his parents. My grandmother migrated up into Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at the time, because that was like part of one of the first migrations from the South. It wasn't part of the second migration, but part of the first migration. And my father, I think, fought in one of those wars. It was before, I don't know which, I don't know, it was a Korean War. I don't know, but I don't think it was, it might've been World War II at that point. But he was actually rare in that after he did that, he was very focused on, he organized against the Ku Klux Klan when he was in Alabama. He was a judo master. He was very much focused on personal strength and the strength of being Black and fighting against. So that was, that whole, we're going to fight against the system. So he wasn't acquiescent to the system. My father was. And so he joined more of the class. He went up to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, was always working on entrepreneurship, and ultimately went to school. There's a classic picture in, what's that organization that collects the archive pictures? Anyway, there's a classic picture of my father with 4 other Negro men. They all had their suits on at the at the Tower of Learning at Pitt University, right? So he was one of those people who were the first taxi cab driver Negro in San Francisco, one of the first to integrate into University of Pitt. And then during that second Great Migration, when my grandparents on my mother's side came more traditionally from the South, in that working in the shipyards, it was very interesting. My mother and my father met here in Marin City. Actually, they met in Marin City. And so it's been interesting to kind of have both of those. I lost my father when I was 8, but he did leave behind a book that's so deep. I didn't even really understand how deep it was. And I read it when I was 12, read it when I was a teenager, still kind of read it again in my 20s. And I was like, wow, because he was a mature man in the 50s. So he was able to analyze segregation, analyze integration, really comment on people who just thought everything was going to blow up. So I was really left with all that when I start to think about why I am the way I am, why I think the way that I am. I have those two streams feeding into me. Yeah, he was a conservative, really, because he was not for unionization, because he felt that the union was totally racist, right? And it was interesting when I read his work when I was in my 20s. I was like, I wish Daddy was here, because I would definitely be arguing with him, because I was like a union person and, more into the democratic. I have a different feeling about that now. Politics, especially because Martin Luther King came and negotiated with just happened to be Democrats, right? But now I understand what he was talking about. I really do. When I go back and I read those debates that were published in local newspapers here, I really understood what he was talking about in the system, in the economic system. And he was very much right to work. He was like, no one's going to tell me that I can't work. So that I would say that, and I grew up in Marin City. Yeah, I mean that I went to Marin City schools and then Marin County schools, because I was part of that busing project. So they bused me into Redwood High and all that, and all those things were stressful in their own way. Like my father had a very strong spine; he had to. I think I inherited that. And so really just became a leader in my own right, because I was like, you ain't. So I was saved by being an artist, really. That really helped me to be able to just be in my own little zone. I read a lot of books. I read so much that I was I was one of those little girls who, like little Negro girls who was like, I was able to use the words, but I didn't use them correctly because I didn't know people around me that spoke those words, right? So it took me a while to catch up. It took me a while to catch up with myself. And yeah, I started theater and dance, and knew that I needed to get out of Marin County in order to really be able to play the roles that I wanted to play. So, early on, I was in Oakland, even though I definitely had deep roots in Marin County too, Belrose Studio Theater on Fifth Street, all of that. So I felt like I was living in two different worlds for a long time as they merged as I got older. And I was able to really be able to make sense of all the parts of who I am. And MC Arts and Culture is really a sum total of just my entire life of being an artist and knowing a lot of artists and feeling that Black artists are more powerful together. Artists, period, are more powerful together. Anybody is more powerful together than they are separated. But because, I feel that my experience growing up in a Black community, like when I grew up in Marin City, it was 99% Black people. It wasn't perfect. Certainly, we definitely had some issues, but what was beautiful about it is that we were able to have conversations without feeling like we're offending anybody, hurting anybody's feelings. Oh, you're talking about Malcolm X now. Ooh, we can't talk about Malcolm, or just all that. I grew up with a strong sense of myself. The first vegetarians that I met were not white people. They were Black people. They were Ital Jamaicans, and they were people from, in the Black consciousness movement. So I grew up in the under the tree, although I'm not a baby boomer, I grew up under the tree of the Black arts movement, of the Black power movement, and was able to kind of get that. And I also saw the crack come in, and just saw that devastation just as we were starting to figure things out, right? I saw that. For better or for worse, I was out of the country. I was in Africa at that time. And then we actually was in Russia for a while, Ukraine and Moscow, as a choreographer, because I was just doing a lot of things. Let's just say I had a career in the arts, and my day job was in wellness. So that's what kind of helped me to not have a 9-to-5 job. So I was, working with people, nurturing people. A lot of my clients were white people. And so I had to early on be able to have a strong spiritual practice, to not be wanting to stab my clients, right? As I had all this other thing going on. So, because I always understood the larger picture of a spiritual journey, but I always very much understood the politics and the social conditioning of this. So I really, that's kind of the medium short story. It's hard to have a total short story, but I wanted to start with my father and my ancestors, because I stand on their shoulders. And so a story is never a complete story of just, this is what I do. I'm the director of MC Arts and Culture, and I lead artists in Marin City. And it's like, that's just a very incomplete picture when we're talking about poverty in America.
Yes.
So that's why I kind of extended my introduction.
I appreciate that extension, because I feel like your family story reflects a lot of the things that we're just seeing in the film. The ways in which people of color have had to find ways around the racist structures that have exploited them. And it sounds like your father and your family were very much at the heart of that. I don't think it's an accident that the Black Power movement, the Black Panthers, a lot of the Black artist movements started right around here, because we had a little bit of freedom as people are migrating out of the South and away from Jim Crow, but we're still secluded into these enclaves and not allowed to spread. But there's a benefit in being in community with one another, working as artists and as creators and entrepreneurs and business people in community. So like you say, we're stronger together. And I think your story kind of reflects that. So thank you for sharing that. So I know you were able to view some of these films. What can I get your take on that? So from an artist perspective, from a Black artist perspective, from somebody who has these lived experiences, what is your initial take on some of the facts that we're learning from these films?
First of all, it always just makes me want to cry, first of all. I mean, just on a pure emotional level.
Right.
And then because I work continually, just, I'm right on the ground, right? So it resonates on a visceral level. The first film where we talk about the wealth gap, and also that we were a monolith politically when we really had more faith in the system, right? Coming out of the civil rights movement, there was just that period of, okay, maybe this can work, right?
Yeah.
And I, as being in the Bay Area, it wasn't an accident that the Black arts and the Black Power movement was in this area, but it also wasn't an accident that COINTELPRO came down most hard here.
Right.
Right. And it also wasn't an accident that the strategy of the US government and the FBI and all those, and if you're Black and you're not a conspiracy theorist in some way, because all those things were kind of conspiracy. It's
Right.
like, now we got the documents. It's like, wait a minute, right? So I don't think it was an accident that the hammer was put down so hard, and that the strategic move of plucking some Black folks from the top. Let's get some celebrities. Let's get some athletes. They like sports. They like entertainment. Woo! Let's get a few of them, lift them up, because Black folks, Joe Louis, and Dorothy Day, they love, let's use those people as our mouthpiece. Let's choose those people to control the masses. And that's worked for a long time. And with the politicians getting into that system, that sense that, oh, wow, we've arrived. Oh, we can affect political change here. So I'm going to put that in one box. All that hope, political change. Yeah. Look at her. She's made it. We can make it too. I grew up always hearing, if you got to make it, you got to work 10 times as hard. You got to work 10 times as hard to prove yourself in the system. And then I also grew up with the sense that, Malcolm told us that, you're working so hard to get a piece of the pie, and the pie is rotten, but you still want some. Or you're working so hard to be at the table, but the leg is broken on the table. So the table's crooked. And guess what? It's slanting toward you as you sit at that table. Because I strongly believe that if the masses of Black people are not rising, then my success is not success. I mean, how could that be? So I have a Black arts gallery for a reason. Does that mean other people are excluded? Of course not. Everybody can come in and shop and work and do different things, but I consciously because if myself, I was a generation that was supposed to be eliminated. I was not supposed to have no teeth. I was supposed to be walking around here all broken up, and not be able to pass the wisdom down to that next generation, because Tupac's generation, the parents that were killed in COINTELPRO and all during that time, those were his mama and daddies and aunties.
Absolutely.
And the system knew what it was doing in that way. So, but let me go back. Let me stay focused on the film, the oligarchy. When I hear that certain things are like January 6th, that's a threat to our democracy. I'm like, what democracy? What I mean, and so I really relate to Kimberly, the last speaker. I relate to her so much. Yeah, it's like, what democracy are you talking about? And that's the problem with dumbing people down in school. We've all bought into this. Land of the free, home of the brave. Our democratic founding fathers, all of them were slave owners. Yeah. And so it's like this dupedness. And yet, in spite of that, Martin Luther King came, the civil rights movement came. This was in spite of that. Yes. In spite of the contradictions, in spite of that, at that time, there was that wealth gap. So it was easy to separate the poor whites, yes, and the enslaved and the indigenous people. So we had Buffalo Soldiers. We had, Africans, running around fighting for the oligarchy at that time, and poor whites battling on the battlefield, while their counterparts, who they in some ways really wanted to be, were in Europe sipping champagne, yeah, while they're getting their legs blown off on the battlefield. That's what was really going on. And so when I think of my education in the United States, I think about, wow, there was just so much that we didn't learn, yes, about the founding of the country, why we are the way that we are. And because of that, the warnings that Eisenhower made about the military industrial complex, and all of those things and why we have this billionaire class and why we're at perpetual war all the time. And then you walk out into the street, and I mean, it's hard to not see, you know, when you're in the East Bay, I'm in the East Bay, it's hard not to see that a good 70% of the people out there are Black folks.
Right.
You know, not Black and brown folks, Black folks.
Yeah.
And I'm not afraid to say that, because the systematic, very, very strategic attack on the Black family
targeted
is real.
Mm-hmm.
The Black man, the threat to the system, that a masculine energy is real. We have to do everything we can do. Nixon was actually convinced not to be for welfare for just the mother and children. He was actually putting some things in place for the family, the whole family, to receive welfare, not just the woman. But then whoever came next kind of, you know, it was the Democratic game, really.
Right.
I think that happened with Black people, and we didn't get it for a long time.
It's almost like a shell game where they keep the pieces moving so that, and you start to make progress, and then they take the shell and they move it over here, and it's just constant, the movement. Yes, I agree. And so that's why when people say, well, what party are you? I'm like, I'm the Black Party. And the Black Panthers it was a party. Mm-hmm. It was a Black Panther party. It was a socialist party. Right.
Right. And so, yeah, our duopoly is just stupid, you know, because it's an oligarchy.
Yeah.
We're in an oligarchy. So how are you going to, you know, so yeah, 1 month is the flavor of the month. The Republicans feel like the bad guys. Trump feels like, oh, he's the bad guy. So often I heard people say, oh, Trump, he's the bad guy. I was like, how is he really any different? I mean, he's not really. My partner, who's from Cameroon, so he's on the African continent. I get a lot of perspective because it's very international and it's very African, because on the international perspective, they ignore Africa. They treat Africa like the masses of Black people in this country on the international, but that's changing.
International scale, yes.
So yeah, he said, you know, the only difference between Trump and all the other American presidents is that Trump is out there waving his thing, you know, and so that perspective of let's not be fooled. Rashida, I like what you said about the shell game,
right?
Because it's a shell game until the 99% movement, going back to that first movie, the 99% movement was probably the closest to what could have really been a Achilles heel in this system.
Right.
And I think that was one of the reasons why it was crushed. And Oakland, man, they crushed it hard in Oakland. Yes. Once again,
strong
you go to
police.
You go to that park in where all the people were living, and there was a lot of unhoused people there. You go there and it's like a little, it looks like corporate. It just looks like a corporate buried over, and then you got the big corporate tower across the street. Are these things accidents? I mean, when I feel them on my gut, I don't feel like they're accidents.
Right.
It's like it was a purposeful statement. No, we're gonna build right on top of where you thought you were gonna rise up. As all people, we're gonna make sure that you never remember that again.
I want to go back to a statement that you made when you were discussing the fact that we are not taught these things. You know, you can go through 12 years of public education, even private education, and not receive any information about how our direct history and the formation of this country brought us to where we are now. And in fact, most people don't engage with that information until they hit college. Well, who can afford college?
Especially now.
Exactly. So you have the separation. I'm going to skip around on some of the questions that I have. Let's talk a little bit about the myths and truths that we have been told about the history of our financial system. I want to drill down deeper into that. Are there ways that our education systems have enabled or furthered these myths? And if you can be specific about ways that you've seen our education system enable and furthering these economic myths. What comes to mind is Ronald Reagan's the welfare queen, right? Like this is these Black women, they get up there and they lie and they take money and they just have babies to get more welfare. That is an economic myth. That's one of them, but it's a fairly recent one. What are the economic myths that we've seen kind of being fed to our young people of all races as they're coming up that is kind of continuing this cycle of racism and poverty? Can you share a little bit about your thoughts on that?
Yes, thank you for asking that, Rashida. The pull it up by your bootstraps is the big one, right?
Yes, it is.
I mean, so tying that to the economics, and Kimberly expressed that really well. That pulling it up by your bootstrap, that monopoly example, perfect example, I would say, of how the economic system, but then let's even put it in the context of those of us that were in those integrated schools at that time when people kind of had hope and thinking that we were going forward. So I didn't learn anything about like the credit system, even in beyond college, or I mean, just so naive around that. Never. And then if you're not with family that is navigating through your first car, or that knows about real estate or any of those things, you're just kind of like in the wilderness. You're just really in the wilderness. So I would say just on those basic levels. Now, they did have a class when I was, in high school. It was like with kind of home ec. They tell you how to balance your checkbook.
Right.
Right. That was in there. But how to navigate the financial system, how to navigate documents, what qualifies you, what doesn't qualify you. And then let's not even talk about redlining and all that. I mean, that was the whole nother thing, but I'm just talking about that personal experience of our ignorance around the financial system. And then you don't even, so once you learn it, okay, you're like, this is what the old boys, this is what they are doing.
Yes.
Right? When you finally like, that's like an aha moment. And usually you just kind of discover it by default.
Right.
There's a default in there. So it's no surprise that there was a whole generation of Black people who lost their homes.
Yeah.
I think that we, as I hate the term, but really I hate the term minority too, but it's true in the United States. But I want to go back to when it wasn't true. In order to become a state in this country at a certain time, if you didn't have 50% white, you couldn't become a state. Your application wasn't complete. Right. When I found that out, I was like, oh, wow, I get it. So, and they were lumping the indigenous population in with the African population. And again, the people who were managing the states, or, whoever they were, governors, whatever, it's like, oh no, we're not going to do that. Yeah, you don't count, but also we're in danger.
Yeah.
We're in danger. If there's too many of y'all, we are in danger. We're in danger economically, and we may even be in danger of our lives. Both, I think, were very, very much on the minds of the people who were formulating our states to say, we cannot have these states be majority states. So all of the migration, the Statue of Liberty, home, I will take all that was for Europeans.
Yes, absolutely.
And it was to specifically make sure that Africans and indigenous people were overwhelmed by the population of Europeans.
Right.
That was on purpose.
Absolutely.
I mean, so I would just say the root of those economic imbalances, it's like, okay, so a little breath was breathed. Okay. We got 50% at least. The South was a little difficult because there were so many Africans in the South, and the Northwest was a little difficult because there were so many indigenous people. But keep the hammer hard on those states. Keep the hammer hard in the South. Let's have our night riders. Let's continue genocide, missionary schools in the Northwest. Let's keep that going, because we need to continue the genocide of these people in order to make sure that their numbers are diminished at all costs.
Right.
This is a white Christian country. For Black people, there was that, okay, we got them as Christians. So if we can maybe mix that up with, let's stick some white Jesus up in there. Let's put some psychological warfare up in there. Let's stir that up. That's worked. Right. So I think all that is tied in into the economics. It's all tied in there.
Absolutely. I think what you're pointing to is that there was a host of strategies that were deployed against any communities of color, period. But specifically, it really seems like the Black community was ground zero and the testing ground for all of those. I would say the Black community and the indigenous community were the testing grounds for those destructive, genocidal, financial exploitation. All of those strategies that are employed were directed, targeted, focused at these communities of color, especially and specifically Black communities. And I see what you're saying with that. But
Rashida, before you go, because I'm glad that you brought other communities in.
Please.
I'm a humanist, so I mean, I'm a student of history, so I see the Asian Exclusion Act and the Japanese internments, and so I feel for those groups and understand that the system was attempting to keep itself white. And with the difference in the Japanese and the Chinese community, specifically the Mexican community, at that time, it was the Mexican community. They weren't called Latino. But the difference was that the families were not strategically targeted.
Right.
So that the Chinese community, although they were excluded, they were able to come together. And we were too at a certain point, but that kept being attacked as we, got out of the civil rights movement. So, Japanese the same, and that sense of entrepreneurship, because they were intact. The sense of entrepreneurship, they were able to sustain themselves in communities, and they had China and Japan.
Right.
We had colonialism on the African continent and colonialism throughout the diaspora. So it's the difference between having your back, even though China was moving up and moving up and moving up, the Chinese community still could point to a great history in China. Yes. Their great-great-grandmother, their great-great-grandfather, they could trace it back. Trace it to Confucius or whoever, the tradition of the Tao, all those things, that spiritual tradition, Shintoism or whatever, while we were like an empty vessel, let's pour Christianity into you.
Yes.
And so
they were allowed to keep those. They were allowed to keep those touchstones that held them together as a community, where ours were violently stripped away from us.
Yeah.
And how can you be in a place to thrive when you're stripped from everything that roots you and grounds you? We're an uprooted tree, still growing, still living, still got some dirt on the roots. But it's an uprooted tree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
And that's what makes it so tragic in a sense. Even as we, because I think that this is a time of great confusion, but it is great growth because some of those roots are sticking themselves back in. It's a crazy time, but that's how I see those differences. And that's why that's why I know I might offend some people here, but that's why when the whole people POC, I didn't know what POC was for a long time until I started doing DEI work, and my associate Laura Everly, who has because she brought me in to do DEI work, and I was like, I kept seeing DEI. First of all, I didn't know what DEI was,
right?
and
Lots
then
of
POC.
letters.
I was like, POC, what's POC? So she said, well, you definitely want to know what DEI is. I was like, okay. Got it. And then POC. And early on, I was like, wait a minute. This is before they put the by in front of the POC.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, well, but you know what? My experience as a Black woman is not the same as a Chinese man.
Absolutely.
Or a Japanese woman. So why are we being lumped together like that? Why are we always being lumped together? And the white community gets to completely, you're on the money. You're on the, it's like, why?
Yeah.
And so, but you can't, at some point you have to just choose your battles. It's like, I can't be juggling all the battles and my friends that are liberals that are using BIPOC and POC. And, I'm not, it's like, it's exhausting.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, I think that when that started happening, and then about 2 years later, Laura was started to use BIPOC. I was like, somebody heard me. Well, at least now there is a distinction between Black, Indigenous, and POC. I appreciated that. I did. I thought that was a good structure. Whoever is up there doing all these alphabetical things, with all these acronyms, right? So yeah. So I know that's a little parenthesis, but you guys have brought me on to ask my opinions, right? So
absolutely. No, this is where we're wanting your perspective. I have a question that I do feel is important to respond to. What is DEI? It's diverse.
Oh, I know what DEI. No, I know what DEI is.
No. Somebody is one of our participants is asking this question of us. So I want to define that term because we like to use jargon, but I do want to unpack that. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we're wanting those are people who are focusing on promoting diversity. That means we have as many different voices in the table. Equity is paying attention to who has been left out of the conversation and making reparations, fixing those social justice issues that are keeping people away, out of the room where the decisions are being made. And inclusion is taking those folks who have been oppressed, who have been left out, and specifically targeting them to bring them into the conclusion. Yes, I see, Debbie, your question as well. So let's define all these alphabet soups. BIPOC, well, let's start with POC, people of color, which includes anybody who's not white. Now, I definitely see what you're saying, Oshalla, about having that that's a problem. That's a problem that it's like white and everybody else. That is a very weird way to frame this. Whites are all unto themselves, and then all of the rest of us folks. That's a problem. So we'll touch on that. And then BIPOC is Black, Indigenous, people of color. So when we're talking about racism, anybody who is not white has probably at some point faced racism of some flavor or some stripe. Black and Indigenous folks have faced strategic, targeted genocide. Literally, people trying to wipe them off the face of the earth in a way that is more intense, was more built into the structure and the fabric of our country. And so those Black and Indigenous folks, us folks, we are separated out of that people of color umbrella to highlight the unique ways in which we were targeted for destruction, and the unique harms that we continue to face in our communities because of that targeted, systemic, 450 years destruction. So that is why we use Black and Indigenous and then people of color. We're together, but let's highlight the people who face the most hardship because of who we are as human beings. So that's the kind of rationale behind by POC. But yes, we can talk about
that's like a whole nother
that
conversation,
is a
right?
whole nother conversation. And we will, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're going to have, the human cost of poverty and racism. That we're going to have a whole separate discussion of that. We might be bringing some of those topics in. So, please stay tuned for those conversations as they come up. I want to kind of get back, Oshalla, as we're talking. You kind of missed the first video where they were talking specifically about the Black and Indigenous, the ways in which Black and Indigenous communities were raped for their labor, for their resources. Their land was stripped away from them, their languages, their culture, all of that was stripped away from them in the name of building wealth for these European countries. So, Oshalla, I'm going to ask you, how do you see slavery and capitalism being inextricably connected? Can you explain a little bit about your view on how, and you can share how you see that playing out in your own life, because I think that it would be a very concrete way to explore that.
Who was the man, I'm forgetting his name right now, shame on me, that wrote Wealth of Nations, that they call him the father of capitalism? Can someone write that in chat? What's his name? What's his name?
I'm Googling.
Yeah, the Wealth of Nations. I mean, I don't always.
That is
in the audience, they said Adam Smith.
Adam Smith. That's right. Okay.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Scottish economist.
A Scottish economist. Okay, so Adam Smith, father of capitalism, and he didn't mention slavery or the raping of the land. How are you going to write a book? How are you going to not only write
the definitive book on capitalism?
How are you going to write a definitive book that all the students of economics after you study and quote very arrogantly that they know Adam Smith, they can quote him? How are you going to write it? How are you going to have credibility? And you don't talk about that all these great industrialists, all these people were like going down to Latin America and creating banana belts and putting, I mean, I won't go into it, but how are you going to do that? And so from the very beginning of people who were going to school, which wealthy white men were the ones that were going to school, we're getting that.
Right.
And so there in their minds, it was, it's like conveniently not thinking about it.
Yeah.
What went on. And so I can understand sometimes the total perplexedness. It's like, I'm just a white guy. What is I'm just a white guy, right? I get it. I get it. And so I don't know if that answered that. What was the specific question?
Yeah, and I'll get to that. But you're saying things that are making me think. That those omitting the fact that the wealth and the land, America's startup money, is what the PBS film that we watched talked about, was this theft and this kidnapping, and that's America's startup money. We don't have to pay our workers, so we get to put that in our pocket. How did America get built? It was because of that. Having those omissions leads to that idea of manifest destiny, right? It just comes to us because we're so great. It comes to us because we deserve it. It comes to us because we are good and right and just. When in reality, you have it because you have stolen people and stolen land and stolen lives and stolen cultures and stolen wealth and stolen riches of the earth and resources. So when you omit that, it's very convenient. What really, I think, strikes me is the intentionality of it all. It is so intentional. those in power who are gathering the wealth very strategically do not want other people to realize how they got the wealth. It's because we work hard. It's because of our, Puritan work ethic. That is why we are so wealthy. And what is conveniently not mentioned, what is conveniently left out, is the ways in which the startup money got. Oh, yeah, it's very easy with that, small $5 million loan to build an empire.
$5 million loan and a couple of thousand acres of
and
land, man.
And a whole system of law and economics and government that is literally built to uphold you and keep you financially wealthy. Hey, you get into debt, that's okay. We have bankruptcy. You can file for bankruptcy and we'll rescue you and bail you out and you don't have to pay that back. Boy, that systemic, structures that are in place. Don't look at that. Don't talk about that. Let's focus on the fact that we're good and just and right, and that's why we have what we have. I think that's one of the myths. What I was talking about, specifically the question I was asking you was, how do you see slavery and capitalism being connected? And I have another question, but I'm gonna ask that. So, do you have any other thoughts about how you see slavery and capitalism being connected?
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, Rashida, you kind of broke it down too, in just that kind of the unfair monopoly game.
Yes.
And then this country being built as a Ponzi scheme. It's like whoever ends up is going to lose. Someone's going to lose in that Ponzi scheme.
Yes.
So I see, especially the real estate game, because you get land first for free. That's how you start. And then it's favoring, but how I connect, I'm more and more connecting. I call it all colonialism.
Yeah.
It was colonialism on the African continent.
Yeah.
It was colonialism here. And colonialism was all about capitalism. So if we don't connect that at the same time that people were brought here to help with the labor, connecting the fact that even though it's connecting the fact that at the same time you didn't even meet in Africa, you met in Belgium,
right?
England, France, Belgium, Germans, who was it? Who was at the table? That all
Portuguese.
Basically the Portuguese were all at the table, dividing up. That's why the Gold Coast is called the Gold Coast, the Ivory Coast.
Yes.
I mean, it's like just no shame.
Just
dividing it up. Okay, this is gold over here. This is that. I guess they didn't go far to say the human coast. Right.
But that was their
coast.
Those were the same coasts.
Right. And it's become more popular these days to say, oh, well, it was the Africans themselves that sold you over. There's always been sellouts to participate. We got them now. It's like, that's not, you don't have to be a genius to see that, but that doesn't take you off the hook for creating a worldwide
an entire system where that could thrive.
Yeah, where the sun never set on the British Empire. And, so yeah, I connect slavery and capitalism with just that. It's colonialism. And colonialism is all about economic control. And then so when you start to really then kind of step out of this particular bubble and then make those connections and those links, then it's starting to get like, whoa, wow, why is France still in there with an army protecting the gold mines, right? Why are they doing that? And what is the relationship with France and the United States? Why were those slave owners sipping champagne in France, during the Civil War? They were connected. And they made sure that the other folks weren't connected, including white people weren't connected, but they were definitely connected.
Right.
So the oligarchs these days, when we first started hearing the term multinational corporation, I think that was like sometime in the 80s or somewhere, multinational, right around NAFTA and GATT.
Yeah.
That was like another layer. It was like the neo-colonialism had begun. So yeah, they're intimately connected. We can't disconnect those two, because capitalism needs the under. It needs someone to be doing under, even if it's then you get to a point where you become so successful playing the racial game. You become so successful. Okay, all right, now we have groomed a good pet class.
Yep.
We've groomed a good class of pets that, don't have any sense of their own language, their own sense of their own identity, or nothing, that we can have them. We can have them, in our, but still, we got to still really, because we never know what one of them might at this point rise up. There's a movie called The Rise of the Black Messiah, or Fear of the Black Messiah. Kind of that. It's like we still got to keep our eyes out and make sure that even in this new Negro class, that we don't. South Africa is a perfect example of that. I've been really observing. And the only difference between South Africa and here, I was talking to my partner about that, because it's fascinating. It's scary in that when you study kind of the American white liberal left, for example, South Africa had that. And they were really proud of the fact that they were allies in coming with the Black community. What happened after apartheid was over, the system, of course, first of all, was terrified of being slaughtered, because unlike here, they are a minority.
Yeah.
So even though they became the economic majority, the economically powerful, that minority still held on to the economic power, there was a sense of that they lost power of influence. It's like, wait a minute, I thought we were the good white people.
Right.
And what's that dynamic that's happening now is that there was a scrubbing of the history of South Africa and the resistance. Some of the young South Africans don't even know who Steve Biko is. Right. And so seeing that and seeing them kind of work through, because the ANC was a socialist movement. It wasn't a capitalistic movement. But the compromise when apartheid was over is they took, rather than take the Cuban model, they took the American model. And there it is. And that's why I think there's so many similarities between our countries, with obvious big differences. But so that's how I connect the capitalism, and that system is a good one to observe, because what if they had gone socialist? Would we still have those, the huge economic disparities with most of the people on the African continent being the ones that are suffering? It's just like, it boggles the mind.
In their own homes.
Yes.
I'm loving this conversation. I wish we had more time. There's one last question I want to ask you, and then we're going to open it up for our people. I'm seeing questions popping up in the chat. Considering that capitalism and racism are interwoven, as we've talked about, what are some possible steps that we can take to maybe counteract some of these impacts? Like, we can start big and then go small, right? So Kimberly Jones is burn it all down,
right?
Being here, level 10, to moderate steps that we can all take. But I've got some thoughts and opinions about that, the moderate steps. Can you share a little bit about what you're, in your viewpoint, what are ways that we can start counteracting some of the toxicity of our economic system?
Wow. I think things like this, talking about it, but those are those little steps too. But still, communication is important because the game has always been to keep people not talking. That's
Right.
always been the game.
I like that.
So I think that, you know, if we're not able to restructure the public school system, just mass homeschooling, you know, but what does that look like if everybody's in their different things? It would have to be a complete transformation of public school system. But then if people don't agree, they're going to pull out of the public school system. The public school system has become wrought with its own issues, right? So I would, on one hand, say, oh, the educational system, you know, is the answer. I'm more and more starting to feel like, and this is where my work at MC Arts and Culture comes in, is having systems that exist in parallel with the public school system that actually, you know, like we have different courses. We have a course called Bringing Curriculum to Life, where we're actually able to use the arts to go deep into history and make it fun, right? Yes. And act out things. We also have things that go to the effect for I would say to really understand the impact that has happened in communities where families have been broken apart, that we're dealing with post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Absolutely.
We're dealing with Stockholm syndrome, big, right? And so I always ask my white friends to be cautious when you're going into the communities to help, because it's fraught with a lot. There's a lot of illness,
trauma,
a lot of illness. And some of that illness is looking at you as you're the savior, you know, and I'm nothing, or my people are nothing, and you and your people know everything. No, let's work together. So there's so much. And I would say that, you know, for that study of post-traumatic slave syndrome, of, you know, the impact, not just that it happened, but for people wanting to really understand, because there are some times where we just say, you know, I got a grant, but I'm going to funnel that grant through someone who's already doing this work. And I'm not necessarily going to come attached to it.
Right.
To look at those aspects, you know, to understand that those dynamics of people not feeling good about themselves perpetuate the system. The internalized racism really continues. I mean, I think really on the bigger level, it's a restructuring of the economic system.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to say, I don't think that can happen. I mean, I am an optimist. Please, everybody on the call, don't think that I'm a pessimist. I'm not a pessimist. But in the United States of America, that is the head of the beast. And then you say, okay, in order to change this worldwide kind of connection to think, we got to cut the beast's head up. First of all, the beast's eyes are wide open. And they're looking, and they've got all these shields. They got all their oligarch security guards around them. The beast is not letting you get anywhere near his head.
Yes.
You can cut off the hand, maybe.
Right.
But I would say, and so maybe it's on the micro, maybe it's forming smaller communities. Marin City is a perfect example. What would that look like if that were, you know, like looking at that? It may not be state by state might be bigger, but how can we form pockets here and there? You know, so that's the closest that I can get to that question.
I think you're touching on some amazing things, and some of the things you're touching on are pointing to our next series, where we're looking at the human costs, the human toll on communities of color. So I'm loving everything you're saying. I'm ready to jump in and to the chat and bring in some of this. Maureen mentioned economic cooperatives. And I think you were touching on that with Marin City, and maybe in the micro, engaging communities supporting and uplifting these communities, giving them what they've been denied, targeted, structured, focused, to begin shoring up these really traumatized communities and allowing them to grow, putting the tree back in its roots, putting the roots back into the ground, reconnecting these communities of color with their home cultures, home languages, home, and from there using that as a healing point to begin growing economically, building those communities. I love that idea, Maureen.
I agree, Maureen. I think that's a good micro. I think that the solutions are in those micros.
Absolutely. Debbie has a question. It's obvious how the South used slavery to increase the wealth of landowners and the states in the South. Can you share a little bit about how the North, oops. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get, my windows are very small here. Can you share about a little bit how the North supported, used, and needed slavery as well?
King Cotton.
Yes.
Cotton.
Right.
King Cotton.
Perfect example.
And then we can go down the list. Now cotton was used, clothing was used by many of the abolitionists as a boycotting protest. People didn't wear cotton clothes. They wore linen. And I think that's how linen, I'm not sure. I mean, this would be someone that would have to do research on that, but I think linen came out of, or let's say the resurgence of linens and those kinds of how can we make alternative fabrics that are natural fabrics, came out of people boycotting cotton. But yeah, the North was definitely, it was this connected in that way. And we can just use that King Cotton as an example and then just fill in the blank.
Right.
Instead of King Cotton, what other form of commodity was used? In the case of Cuba, it was cigars, right? Mm-hmm. I mean,
tobacco.
That's Cuba. Yeah, tobacco, excuse me. Yeah. So, but on and on. So, and then the North was able to capitalize on, this is trippy, actually, because all those advertising campaigns with Uncle Ben and Aunt Jemima and all that, those were Northern things.
Yeah.
That came out of, it's
that idealized the South, right?
Right.
Uncle Ben, wasn't a Northern vernacular convention. Aunt Jemima, those are Southern.
Right.
So it's we're going to take really the worst that the South has to offer. We're going to use it in marketing and make some money off of it.
That's right.
And that's literally the least that they did.
Yes.
The least.
Yeah.
The triangle trade really is kind of the root of that. You take slaves from Africa, you bring them to the South, make them grow and pick the cotton. Then that cotton is shipped up north and turned into fabrics and textiles. And then they're shipped back to Europe where they're sold to make money. And that money is invested in buying slaves. And then you have this triangle trade. So this triangle trade is just, and that goes for indigo, where you're dyeing the fabrics.
Oh, God,
and that goes with rice, and that goes with all of these processed in the North and then shipped overseas, sold, and then that's used to continue that cyclical oppression and rape of the African continent and the indigenous resources, and it just goes on and on and on. So I think it would be a mistake, I think, to demonize the South as if it is a separate beast.
Right.
It is the same beast, and the beast is capitalism.
And the beast is capitalism. I would say, even in the case of the South, in some ways, they've come further along because there was a connection with Black people and white people. The white people there had more familiarity. The food was similar.
Right.
Their
children were raised by our women.
Yes.
That idea of the mammy, which became the Aunt Jemimas, and they were raised so many white children were raised by Black women, were nursed by Black women,
Yes.
sometimes, most of the time, to the detriment of their own families. We want to
Yeah.
talk about
Yeah.
that intergenerational trauma. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's definitely a connection there.
And I'm not holding that up as a praise, but it adds the complexity. It adds to some complexity that if you're knowing someone, you're going to have a little more honest relationship with them. You're definitely going to either just hate them straight up, right? And want to burn their house down. Or you're going to say, you know what, let them do their thing. We'll do our thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're cool with that. We'll just be
Mm-hmm.
segregated.
Right.
And all segregation wasn't bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
While in the North, there was a sense of not really understanding and knowing the Black communities.
Mm-hmm.
But feeling like we have to do something. And so you're dealing with strangers.
Right.
And
The
so
other.
right. And so integration kind of was weird in that way, because you're integrating with people that you're not knowing. It's just, yeah. So it's just a very interesting mix. But no, definitely the North had, and I would say that de jure segregation, right? That's what they called it in the North. So later on, way after the enslavement era, that feeling of, well, it's kind of not in my backyard thing. So the North was definitely more about that.
Absolutely.
Than the South was.
Because South, it was too late. They're already in your backyard. You brought them there.
Right. And it's like, y'all just have that house over there and just leave us alone.
Yes.
We good. It's like 10 miles away, that farmer such and such, he lived down there. Go down there.
Yeah.
Right. I mean,
absolutely.
So it was people in some ways, after just all the terror of the Ku Klux Klan and all that, in some ways were allowed to be left alone.
Yeah.
And then if the children wanted to come together, they did. But in that leaving alone, yeah, anyway, so that's differences between the North and South. Yeah, that's some of it that I see.
And I want to draw a line between kind of that dynamic that you're talking about, to kind of, I'm going to bring it back to Marin, and just the there's a dichotomy and a push and pull in the Black community about, we want our kids to have what white children are assured, but we also want to have our own communities and to be able to be left alone and to have that. There's a push and pull there. And I don't know if we're going to find a balance to that, but I know that there's that sense of, we want to be able to thrive the way, to participate in the American dream. We can talk about the illusion that is the American dream, but we want that security and that stability and the ability to thrive. But we also want to be able to do that in our own communities. We don't want to have to be the only Black or brown person in the room every time, all the time, to get those things. There's a tension there, I think, that we need to really look at and parse out a little bit, as we're looking at solutions. How do we give people of color, especially Black people, especially Indigenous folks, space to be centered and rooted in their own communities, especially since those communities were under attack for so many years, and ensure that those don't turn into wastelands that have been completely disregarded and disinvested from, where you're basically leaving them to rot, versus leaving them to thrive, right? So that's something that I think that, as we're talking about solutions, we need to interact with that tension a little bit of how do we hold both of those things in our hands at the same time?
Two things come to mind. You said space.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to come back to our work at the gallery. It's a Black arts gallery, intentionally so.
Yes.
To create a safe space for Black artists, to create, to not always have to deal with the politics of the white art world. Let's just be honest.
Yes.
It's like, and is interesting. Many of the artists have told me that they have not been so kind of respected and acknowledged until they really started working with other Black people.
Yeah.
From outside, from outside, because it's like, oh, because then there's feeling like, oh, wow, you guys, it's like going to Harlem. I'm going to use Harlem as an example.
Yeah.
Harlem existed in the United States, but Harlem was Harlem.
Yes.
You went to Harlem, you knew you were going to get some hot water cornbread in Harlem.
Yes.
You knew you were going to get,
good music and folks that
knew,
look like you and talk like you. And
but everybody else knew that too.
Yeah.
If you wanted to get some grits and some eggs and whatever, and you're coming from Boise, Idaho, you're going to New York, you're going to go to Harlem, right?
Right.
So it's like, something happened, and I would say recently with the displacement and gentrification after the crack, where because that's relatively recent, that those spaces have been disrupted. Somebody called the police on a drumming circle in Harlem. When I heard that, I was like, oh, Harlem? Really? Harlem is down? I couldn't believe it. Whether you're into religion or not, just, when, you come in and you are in your community, you have your house. Now you're calling the police on the churches because the churches are making too much hooping and hollering. So I maybe consider before you move in, but you can't, because again, we're in a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
And so you're going to, whoever you are, you're going to get that house. So I would say, as far as solutions, using reparations to,
I like that. And
Trinidad and Jamaica are actually a little further ahead than we are in this conversation. They have two aspects to the reparation. They have three aspects to the reparation, but the individual aspect of reparations is in there, but not as strong. They're focusing on community development in their reparations, like having space, having little, Africa town here, doing that, little Harlem's, little Detroit's, little areas, and that being richly funded with reparations. And they also have in their reparations requests, demands, the repatriation to the continent of Africa, who there are many leaders on the continent that are there, because there's lots of land in Africa that, because the West is crumbling so much, a lot of Europeans and Chinese are buying up land.
It's happening again.
Right. And so it's like a double sword, where the African Americans and the Africans in the diaspora are still like spinning, like, just recovering. And then all of a sudden now you're looking back home and it's like, wait a minute. So they're incorporating those two aspects of repatriation of the land on the continent of Africa, and community development.
Yes.
In addition to education. And education often gets mentioned in reparations, but I think that the more that we look at community reparations, to be able to heal some of these communities, and if you do community reparations, there's going to be a cap. No more real estate sold outside of African Americans. Yeah. Period. And of course, that's going to cause a big, but reparations has already caused a big, we can send so much money outside of the country to people. I'm not mentioning any names. Right. But we can just keep doing that. It's like, that's such an insult to Black people here. Yeah. That's such an insult. Like, really? Really? Oh, but you have to do a study on reparations. Yeah. We need to study that. We need to study that. You didn't need to study.
It's in committee.
Yeah, it's in committee. So I would say that reparations is intimately connected with that. And I think, especially if it's not focused initially on individual reparations, it doesn't get as much of a pushback, because communities can come together and kind of do things a little on the down low, to create Someone had
Absolutely.
mentioned those micro solutions. Maureen was mentioning those micro solutions. Those can be, combined, where then our work is with the county,
Yeah.
and working within that, because the county has responsibility too. So that's how I would frame that.
Yeah, I think you're making some excellent points. Oh, I love that we have this rich conversation and we're bringing in a lot because they are so deeply interconnected. I feel like it's so important that we do connect all of these ideas and these thoughts to what is happening now. How can we change what is happening? The fact that we're seeing this pattern of capitalism reemerging on the African continent. Only this time the players have changed slightly. Chinese people are buying up oil, concerns in Nigeria and things like that. That's happening. And so we're seeing this like almost a resurgence of that capitalist system. How do we disrupt that? It's going to require something outside of capitalism.
Well, I agree with you, Rashida, actually 100%. I agree with you. And the Chinese situation, because again, Jean-Pierre is always like, he's so focused on that. It's a little different in that, in the case of the Europeans, it was just total like, my nice jacket.
I'll take it. I'm just going to take it.
I'm going to take it.
Like, I'm not going to ask. I'm just going to take it.
Right. In the case of the Chinese, they're like, nice jacket. And, we have some shoes and we have a hat and we have, and so there has been incredible infrastructure that has been created on the continent. I mean, some people would just not recognize some of the infrastructure, and they're balancing it. The communities are balancing it with care for our animals.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to come here and just raise our animals, and pollution. And there are those concerns. However, because the European agenda was to always keep Africa poor and underdeveloped, and a great vacation spot, because there's no pollution here.
Yeah. We haven't ruined it with our industrial complex.
Yes, we haven't. So there's that. It's a little different, but the solution there is the diaspora populating in there. Black business owners, Jamaican, African Americans coming, and there's several calls to do that, because we've been living in the belly of the beast.
Yeah.
We know kind of what's that dynamic.
Absolutely.
and what's coming. So, so I would say, yes, Rashida, that is true. And we have to be wiser this time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I want to thank you so much, Oshalla, for joining us and for sharing your unique perspective. I really feel like we, because of your background in the arts, you have a finger in economics. You have a finger in that healing movement that needs to happen in the Black community, and have that historical context as well, because that's all reflected in the arts, in the communities where we grew up. And I think it's important that we make those connections in order to center ourselves before moving forward in correcting and addressing some of these issues as they arise.
And the arts have been used and are now still being used as one of the greatest propaganda arms.
Absolutely.
And so that for us as artists, we have to be really, really mindful, careful to be able to counterbalance that, because that's where the brainwashing happens. That's where the war is really won.
I agree. And you see this with conservative concerns buying up entertainment.
Yes.
You see that I think the next battleground for economic and social reform, it's going to be in the arts, in the entertainment industry, in those areas.
Yeah, it's happening.
People are connecting with it without critical thinking. That's definitely going to be the next battleground.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Oshalla. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us today. This was amazing discussions. I'm putting a couple of links in the chat Oshalla, you're Marin City Arts and Culture, is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah. Okay,
And
type in MC
mhm,
Arts. Just spell it all out. MC Arts
mhm.
and Culture.
And
And culture.com. I
okay.
recommend that we all go there. We are having on the 16th of February at the gallery, we are having Marin City in general is that we're all collaborating on Black history things that are going on. On the 16th, the gallery is going to be hosting interviews with a former Marin City Black Panthers. Walter Turner is going to be on that panel,
Wow, wonderful.
and several others. And so that's going to be, and then on the 27th, no, the 26th or 25th. Anyway, it's going to be on the website. We're doing a music of the movement.
Yes.
So we're going to be,
Love
so
that.
in the morning, so it's going to start with spirituals. People can come and kind of chill and, get the spiritual on. And by the end of the day, we'll be like, yeah, ain't no stopping us now.
Yes,
So we're
I
gonna
love.
bring your dancing shoes to
Yes.
that, and
Oh,
so that's
joy.
gonna be a real fun. So if you just want to come out and just have a really good time and start the day with reflecting on those old spirituals of resistance, wading the water and all that.
Yes.
But the 16th at the gallery, and I will have links on the website
Fantastic.
that you can register. Both events are free.
Love it.
But I haven't created the links yet. So in the next few days, go and you'll be able to register. And please RSVP if you're going, because that's all because we're going to be feeding folks. We're
Yes.
going to be feeding good food. So we need to know how many people are coming.
Fantastic. And Lisa, I know that SURJ is also doing a book club that is connected to
Correct.
this event. Can you share a little bit about that? And then
Sure.
we'll close out.
We are doing, as part of our work, we have this little book club, and it's our February book discussion is with a book on the recommended reading list for this event. It's going to be on Sunday, February 26th at 4:30 until 6 p.m. on Zoom. The book is entitled Our Black Year, One Family's Quest to Buy Black in America's Racially Divided Economy by Maggie Anderson. And you can register at surjmarin.org/events.
I love that, Lisa. And then after you read the book, come on down to the gallery, get
That's
some
right.
art, buy
Get
some earrings.
we've got your arts and culture covered.
We do. So MCR, okay, there it is. I see it there. Okay,
Yes,
perfect.
wonderful.
Yeah,
And we appreciate you all for being here. I would like to give special thanks to the South Novato Friends of the Library and
thank
the
you.
SURJ Marin for funding this programs like this so that we can continue to bring excellent speakers, excellent conversation, excellent exploration of these really difficult, meaty topics. We're able to dive into those because of the support of people like you. So we appreciate you. Please do invest in, explore, give to MC Arts and Culture, other organizations that are doing the work. Oh, in the email where I send out the link, I will also send a link to Sogorea Te, Rematriate the Land Trust for Indigenous Americans who live in our area, who are trying to, again, replant that tree, get those roots back in the soil, reconnect so that they can thrive and grow, so that we can thrive and grow. We appreciate you and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rashida.
Absolutely. We loved having you and we're excited about our next event and we're excited about everything you are doing. I hope to see some of you there at Oshalla's events with MC Arts and Culture.
And keep Marin County Library free.
Yes, always.
I'm looking at the sign in the back of your head. It's like, keep Marin County Library, keep libraries free.
Absolutely. Your
That's part of the
support
solution
of libraries is, it definitely can be part of reconnecting and helping communities to thrive.
It absolutely is. Thank you, SURJ. Really love y'all so much. Really, all the work that you're doing and just hosting things like this. Very, very appreciated. And that you have a strong spine to be able to hear difficult truths.
Oh, it wasn't difficult at all.
Yes, it's a joy.
It was truth. It was truth.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. And
Okay.
we appreciate you. And we're going to close out for today.